So, Shalom Aleichem, this week we are going to be doing the rest of the beer of Tse'ena Ure'ena. And this is the first beer. There'll be another one that we will do next week, at least start next week. Here we're holding an Ois Hey on Daf Chav Gimel Amid Dalid. And we're going to do from Hey today till the end of the Maimer. So he said, according to all of this, we'll now understand that which is explained on the pasuk, Sois Tosis, that be glad and joyful, which there the pasuk is that the barren one should be joyful when her sons gather into her in peace, in joy. And so the question is, that's asked there, is that if she's akara, if she's barren, how do her sons come in joy? She has no sons. So the answer is that she's a barren, at least in the mimer there, because she had children that were nekeva. And so therefore, when she has sons come in, the sons, basically this is the idea that the daughters have turned into sons. And how does it happen? Through Sois Tosis, through the idea of joy, of Simcha. So now he's going to explain this verse, which we mentioned already. We mentioned it earlier. But anyway, the Bais we're not going to explain this, why this is shaykh. Okay, so according to all this, we understand what it says on this verse. Sois Tosis, that through the Simcha Mitzvah, we draw down that even when the Jewish people, on a level of akara, they're barren, only that the higher arousement is coming from above, it's coming on its own. It still accomplishes that it should be in a way of a zachar, it should be in a way of a male. So, as we learned before, that when we have a sustal eila, arousal from above that follows an arousal from below in a sustal sata, then you have yolדת zachar, because it started with a arousal from above. But if the arousal from above came before the arousal from below, that means sustal eila came on its own, and then only afterwards I had a sustal sata, an arousal from below. Then it's yolדת nekeva, feminine. But so he says here, we learned Sois Tosis, that there's this idea that from an arousal from above that comes before the arousal from below, and it's followed by an arousal from below, we still have yolדת zachar. So how does this work? He said, we understand this through first introducing to explain the connection between the two introductions that we gave previously in this mimer that we explained about these two levels of sustal eila. Sorry. The first introduction was about the two levels of sustal eila, which was one. And then the other hakdama, the other introduction, the second one, which was about the difference between Torah and mitzvahs. And the idea is that just like by Torah mitzvahs, we say that there's an advantage in Torah over mitzvahs. And there's also an advantage of mitzvahs over Torah. The same way, also in a similar way, we'll find the two levels of sustal eila, the same type of idea. And that is that even though we said before that the sustal eila, that it gets accomplished and aroused through an sustal sata, and we say that sustal eila is from a more inner level of the Ein Sof Baruch Hu, of the light of Hashem, and it's much higher from the level that the sustal eila that shines on its own all the time of its own for the purpose of the life force of the world, which is only a external light, external revelation, yet the source and the foundation of the sustal eila that comes of its own is really from a higher place. Why? Because it comes of its own as it was from the beginning of creation, that it comes from the level of that Hashem who is totally desires kindness, in a simple kindness. And so its source is drawn from the place of Atzmus itself, which there, a sustal sata doesn't reach at all. Only because God is kind, He gives. And looking at Chaim, the Shar of Man and Mad, in the second Maimer there, in the explanation of what it says, that when it came up in his desire to create the world, etc., and that's what it says by after the Mabul, that it says that forever the world, that the seasons will always stay in place, that day and night will never stop. That means that there's a level, this level of life for the world will never be stopped forever, even if, heaven forbid, the world generation is not worthy of it. For this reason, that its source is coming from a place that the arousal from below does not affect it whatsoever. And look at what it says in the Maimer L'Matzech Al Shminis, and also in the Maimer of Chai V'Inish L'Besur B'Puria, about this question of the answer of the Medrash, that the question was, how could the Eibishter bring down rain, and how could he make the things grow on Shabbos, right? There was a Ma'apikoris who asked, and basically the answer he said was, in the Medrash, that the Eibishter, to him there's no separate reshuyas, there's no separate domains of public domain and private domain. So caring doesn't apply. So the question is, so how does that apply? So in the Maimer it explains that the idea of different reshuyas is that there are places that are pnimius, inner levels, and more external levels. And there we have these issues in the pnimiistica, in the inner levels. That's where we have the issues of Shabbos. And that is in the spiritual life force of the world, where there is what we call work and differences. On the other hand, there's something higher than Shabbos, which that is the life that comes all the time, all the time the same, from the external part, which is even higher, because it comes from a place beyond all the different domains of Shabbos, and that is what keeps. From there is where things grow and things and rain happens, and from that level, the whole Shabbos doesn't apply. It's beyond Shabbos, and that's by the Eibishter himself. So he said from the answer, it's understood that the source and the shmucker of the light and the life force of the world is coming from a place that's even higher from the level of Shabbos. And the Shabbos is an arousal from above that is drawn after an arousal from below. Because of what? Because we have to have 6 days of work first. And so it's understood clearly from this that the source of the life and the light of the world is from a place that is higher even than the arousal from above that comes from the arousal from below. That means it's a place that you can't consider there high and below. There's no arouse from below to arouse from above. There's no above and below. It's beyond it all. And look, and that's where the life force of the external part of the world happens on Shabbos. So it's external, but it's much higher. And look what it says in another place in the explanation. There's there, Parshat Vayera, on what it says, that she's also my sister, the daughter of my father, and how, in general, the source of the constant unification, which is called the marriage of Chachma and Bina, Abba ve'ema, and then there's another unification, which is to give birth to the new neshamas, which that's generally called by the term of the marriage of Malchus. And that one, the lower one, Zal Malchus, is accomplished through Isus Lasata. But the higher one, it happens all the time by itself. So it's maybe external, but it's much higher. And it's also explained in other places in the explanation of Ayilcha Metzitzis, and what it says, that my holiness, the Pasuk says, the Medrash says, that you should be holy, but it says you could have my holiness, but then it says, but my holiness, my holiness is higher than yours. And that means that there's an usus le'ela that comes from Isus Lasata. That's the level of Kedusha Schem. That, in other words, your holiness. That means, how does this arousal from above happen? Because of your act, because of what you've done. So it's your holiness. We sort of make Hashem holy. And then there's Isus le'ela that comes before there's Isus Lasata, which that is to arouse from below to above. And this Isus le'ela is much greater than the one that happens from an Isus Lasata. Because Isus Lasata cannot reach this first one. As the Baal Shem Tov says about the Baskol, the voices that come and from heaven, that are announced in the world, that announces what they make, it causes thoughts of tshuva. And they come from above, that a person cannot do anything about it from himself. Only because Hashem is the one who is totally kind and wants to give kindness, these are the things that happen. And that's what says, that this my holiness is still higher than yours. This level of Sustuleila comes from a place that's much higher than yours. In other words, it's Sustuleila that happens because of your avodah, because of your actions. And look also what it says in another place about Lusasasi, in the idea of atem tachrishun, that you shouldn't arouse anything. In other words, at the time there's a revelation that by the splitting of the sea, where our avodah will not make a difference. It comes from a place much higher. But from this, it's understood and explained that the Susta Le'el that happens of its own to arouse the Susta L'Sata has a much greater stature. It's greater than the Susta Le'el that happens because of an Susta L'Sata. But he said, but in truth, we see many places explain the opposite, that the Susta Le'el, the arousal from above, that happens because of an Susta L'Sata, an arousal from below that it's caused by a lower arousal, is much higher. And that's what we said, the idea that when a woman, she sows first, she gives birth to a male. In other words, when it starts from below, you have male, which is much greater. And look what it says in the explanation of Eilamase, that the Sustal Eila, the arousal from above that happens before the arousal from below, is only an external level of the light. As we say that his right embraces me. But the arousal from above that happens after the arousal from below is a drawing down from a more inner level that you could have a birth from this. So it's much greater. So that she says the answer is that truth is both of them are true. At the source of the Susla Eila that happens of its own comes from the level of Kichafetz Chesed, the place of extreme and unlimited kindness, which means it comes from a place that arousal from below cannot reach at all. Yet that drawing down is only from an external level of that level. Only it's an external level of a higher level. As explained in the Hashirim, it's also with regard to the source of the life force of the world, which comes from the level of Adam Kadma, that it comes from the level of Adam Kadma, and it says that's also related to this beer he said before about Shabbos, that the feet of Adam Kadma come down into the world of Asiya, and I'll mention this again later, which as we see in a body, the skin of a person is equal, no matter where it is in the skin, whether it's feet, whether it's head, etc. So Shabbos is regard to the inner parts of the body. A brain is higher than a heart is higher than you're walking, etc. So in this regard, there's the idea of the elevation of the world, then you can't do malacha. But with regard to the skin that's around, it's all equal, from the top to the bottom, and Shabbos and the weekday, it's always from that higher place. So the same way here, the source of the life force of the world that comes automatically is from the level of Adam Kadma. Yet, it's only an external part of Adam Kadma, and the example of skin, as we just mentioned. And also, it only shines in an external and surrounding manner, that it surrounds it all in one equal way, so all is equal within it. On the other hand, the arousal from above that happens because of its arousal from below, that is the revelation of the inner level mamish, and not an external level. And therefore, even though the revelation is from a place that the arousal from below could reach, but yet, because the revelation is from an inner level, it has an advantage, even more than the arousal that happens of its own, as we said before, that a woman sows first, she gives birth to the male. In other words, the woman has this about power, especially the feminine, she could accomplish more than could be, that's a greater level than what the male accomplishes on its own. So understand from this, the difference between these two levels of a Sustal Eila is similar to the difference between the advantage of mitzvahs and the advantage of Torah. Each one over its other. That even though that what we draw down through mitzvahs and Torah, generally both of them are through the actions of what we do down here, and not like the Sustal Eila that happens of its own, that we don't have any effect on it. Yet, we're able to understand a little bit from it, that just like there's an advantage in Torah over mitzvahs, even though the mitzvahs come from a higher source than Torah, but only because Torah is a more inner level. That means it comes from the inner, it comes from the hidden intellect. And the mitzvahs come from the external, which that is the skull, and therefore we say in Yerushalmi that all the mitzvahs of Torah do not come equal to one halacha of Torah, because the halacha of Torah comes from the inner in brain rather and intellect, rather than from the skull. The same way also is with regard to the advantage of the Sustal Eila, which happens through an Susla Sata, which is a more inner level, therefore has its advantage and it's greater in a certain vein than the Susla Eila that is drawn of its own, which is only a external level and it only shines in a makiftic way, in a way that the right hand surrounding in a more removed manner from its recipient. And it's just as there's also an advantage in mitzvahs over Torah, that even though they're from an external level, but the external is from a higher level than what Torah is coming from, as we explained, in other words, it's an external level of a higher level, as we explained before at length. The same way also there is this advantage in the Sustal Eila that happens of its own, to arouse in the Sustal Sata, that even though it's only an external level, but its source is from a higher place, a place that the Sustal Sata cannot reach there at all. Okay, so this point in the Maimer we've explained that there's two levels of Sustal Eila. There's one that comes first, which is just an arousal from Hashem all the time, to have all the worlds working and functioning. Or, as we're saying here even more so, in your Avodas Hashem, it's something that's coming because God is kind and He causes you a huri tshuva through a baskol, and therefore He arouses you to tshuva even though you've done nothing on your own. And that arouses you to do something down here, and you have your arousal that happens after the arousal from below. That's the first sistul eila. Then we have a second level of sistul eila, which is the one that happens after you do avodah down here. You arouse yourself, etc., to turn to Hashem, and therefore there was a arousal from below, reciprocation and a reward, or whatever you want to call it, a revelation from God that comes from above as a answer, like Shabbos, which is a revelation of godliness in this world based on the 6 days of week that we worked. He says, now there's a third level. There's a third level also in this level of sistul eila, and that's also in the sistul eila, which is higher than arousal from below, from the sistul sata. In other words, it's arousal from below cannot reach it at all. As we said before, that my holiness is higher than your holiness, but yet this arousal from above, it doesn't reside, and it doesn't get revealed only when there's a completeness in the actions of those who are below, and it's already been brought upon them and shined upon them, the arousal from above, which is in accordance with the arousal from below. So in other words, you have this second level of a sistul eila. When you've reached that completeness and that wholesomeness, then there becomes this higher sistul eila could then reside and be revealed, which is even higher than from this sistul eila that comes from a sistul sata, and the sistul sata cannot accomplish this and doesn't affect this. And it's explained in other places on the verse on the Yeshena that you should open pischili, which there it says, similar to the idea of pischili k'chudash shamachat, open for me like the hole, the point of a needle, and I'll open for you. Hashem says, in other words, you open your heart like the hole of a needle. I will open you up, or I'll open up like the doors of the ulam of the sanctuary of the Beis Hamikdash, which was humongous. In other words, he says here that you open up a stilasata, but then all of a sudden you can get a revelation that's totally higher and beyond it completely. And also it says by Shabbos that it says I have a great gift, and I have in my treasure storage houses, and its name is Shabbos. In other words, there's another level of Shabbos which is higher than a sistul sata, because a gift doesn't happen because you achieved it. A gift happens because the giver wants to give it. And this is the level that's called Shabbos Shabbosin, the Shabbos of Shabbos. And that's a gift specifically that's higher than any arousal from below, as explained in other places. But yet, our Rabbi said that only the one who prepared an Erev Shabbos could eat on Shabbos. In other words, that you can't draw down this gift only after you've already had an arousal from above, which happened and got drawn first in Shabbos through the arousal from below of all your days of the week. Which, unless it says to make the Shabbos, where the Jewish people create Shabbos through their work of the 6 days and making Shabbos. And look, also it says in this Kasher Shemaim HaChadashim that there's this level of this revelation that I make is higher than the sistul sata, and yet it only gets revealed after the complete and wholesomeness of the revelation of the sistul eila that happens because of the sistul sata. And the same thing also, if this is a mention, what's found with regard to Mila, that's on the 8th day, and the reason for that is that you have to pass over one Shabbos, meaning you need to have the level of a Shabbos, which is the sistul eila that happens after sistul sata, and only after that you can have a bris Mila, which is a revelation that's even higher. And the idea here is that the idea of this revelation of this sistul eila is a revelation, an inner revelation mamish, from a level that a sistul sata cannot reach. And it's not only an external level, like the regular sistul eila that happens before a sistul sata, that even though it's also from a level of ki chafetz chesed, that it's from Hashem's desire to do kindness, yet the revelation is only in an external way, in a level of makif, and that's it. And therefore, it could come even before the sistul sata and the sistul eila that happens afterwards. But that it should draw down this revelation in an inner way. In other words, this level that we spoke about, this first sistul eila, coming from the high place of chafetz chesed, of complete desire from God, His goodness, just in its purity, that we should have it in an inner way, in a way of affection, in a way that it affects us. That it should be mamish begiloi in an inner way, is specifically only that there's first an sistul sata until an arousal from below, until the point that it could reach, and that you arouse the arousal from above that happened through it, and then you could have from an inner level, from a place that a sistul sata cannot reach at all. And that's also explained in another place in the Marachai Sarah, and the reason why the davening of Ma'ariv, the Yaakov Avinu established, who he is the special one amongst the forefathers, is considered a reshus, permissible. It's not an obligation. And the reason of the answer to this is because the level of Yaakov is like the inner pole in the Mishkan that broke, that it went from one end until the other. All the other poles only went one side. So for 3 sides, you need 3 poles. The middle pole went from extreme to extreme. In other words, that he's able to reach from a place to a place that even an arousal from below cannot reach. And that's the reason why it's reshus, why it's permissible. Because it only happens, it's not an obligation, it can't be something inner, it can't be something it's something beyond. But yet, when does it happen? This revelation only after you have the arousal from below first, until the point that it could reach, which that is that you need to have chakras and mincha first, which that was established by Avraham and Yitzchak. And this is similar to what it says on the 3rd day, which b'yom hashlishi, look in that mimer, b'yom hashlishi refers to the times of Mashiach. It's the 3rd level, a higher revelation. The same thing, Ma'ariv is the 3rd level, etc. And the same thing also we'll understand with this light that is drawn through Mitzvah and Torah, that the Torah is from the more inner level, which that is level of the inner level of Chachma of the crown, and it's called Moiches Dima, the inner Moichet. And the mitzvahs, they are from the level of the crown of the crown. In other words, they're not from the intellect of the crown, but the crown of the crown. But from the external level of the crown of the crown, which that is the skull that's over this Moiches Dima, over this hidden intellect. In other words, the Moiches Dima of Keser. But then there's another 3rd level which is higher than both of these levels, and that is from the inner level of that crown of the crown, that the skull is its external level. And this is maybe what it says, the crown that he was crowned by his mother on the day of his chasna, this mountain Torah, as is explained, because in Eitz Chaim, in Shar, the Shar here is wrong. You look in the back, he'll give you a different source. Oh, actually, no, Shar Chav Beis, I think it's Chav Gimel, Seif Perik Beis. But anyway, he writes Chav Beis, Seif Perik Vav. Anyway, he writes there that there's and basically what he's saying there is that we see in a person down here that the crown is a representation. Really, the crown of the person is a light that shines above him. And he says, Or Ruchni, it's a spiritual light that shines and surrounds him above. And the crown, he says, is only the external part of that level. So that's mamash, this idea that the crown is the thing that actually is higher and surrounds the skull. And so therefore, what's the revelation that happens that we're talking about here, that he crowned him, is not just the crown itself, which is the actual skull. It's actually the light that is above the skull. And that's the inner level that is this level even higher than the skull itself. Okay, now I'll understand the idea of the joy of a mitzvah, because the joy is a revelation of that which is hidden. And for example, of a king, that his way is generally to sit, his natural way is to sit in his own rooms, room within room, because the honor of a king is inside, in privacy. But at the time of his joy, he reveals himself, and he gets seen to the eye of all. And so the mitzvahs, their source from a very high place, from where we said before, the level of the crown, which is even higher than the wisdom of Moiches Dima. But the essential level of the crown doesn't get revealed at all, only an external level, which that is the actual skull, which is the desire, the supernal desire, which that's the level of the skull, as we mentioned before. But through the Simcha and the fulfillment of mitzvahs, which is Simcha, the joy, is aroused as an inner revelation. Therefore, through that, you are actually able to bring down a revelation of the inner level of the crown. And that is what we said in the day of the crown. He was crowned when his mother crowned him. So, as he said, that the essential level of the crown, it doesn't get revealed at all. Only an external part, which that is the skull, which is the level of the supernal desire. I just said over that line. But through the joy and the fulfillment of mitzvahs, that the joy arouses the inner level of a person, of the king, etc. Therefore, through that, we actually bring down the inner level of the crown. So that's where we're holding. So he says, this is what he says, that this is the crown that his mother crowned him with, specifically as we say, what is the mother is Bina, Ema Banim Smecha, that's where joy is, the Jewish people are joyful in you, that through the Simcha of a mitzvah you arouse this supernal pleasure, which is the crown, and this Atara, which is beyond the crown, as we said, and look what it says in the Maimer says Osis, in the Maschil, Hashem Li Ba'izroi, and it's explained above, that this level is the 3rd level that there is in Issus Leila, which is higher than the other first 2 Issus Leilas. Okay. And therefore, this in the revelation of this level, we also have that when the man sows first, that also then it gives birth to a male. Why? Because this which a man sows first, you usually have the birth of a female. That is only when the revelation is coming from an external level, which then the arousal from above, which aroused the arousal from below, is that it only accomplishes a female, which is a lower level of love, smaller, immature love. On the other hand, through the joy of a mitzvah, which there the revelation is coming from a arousal of above that's higher than any arousal from below. In other words, it's coming then from the inner level itself, so it's even higher than the sustala ela that comes from the arousal of above that comes from arousal of below, and therefore it gives birth to a zachar, to a male. And that's what it says, that joyful, says Tassis, and the barren one, when she gathers her sons, in other words, besimcha, and it's her sons specifically in this level. And so therefore, basically we have as follows, that when a person has aroused from above and it's not really him doing it, so then it's not a lasting a love that he has for Hashem that gets developed within him. When he has it, that he aroused it, and then there's an arousal from below that brings that out. Then you have a midah, then you have a love for God that's long-lasting. Now, if you did something externally, but it came with a feeling of joy, that you had joy in doing it, so therefore it was real to you in the fact that it was joyful, so even though it didn't come from your arousal, it came from God's arousal, but you did it with joy and you added joy to it, and therefore you experienced it in a joyful way, that will cause that it'll become a long-lasting love as well. So look also what it says in the Maimer, an explanation of Kaisvarchu and the beer of the Kaisvarchu as B'nai Yisrael, which he there explains the three brachas of Birchas Koyanim. Yivarecha Yar Nisas. Yivarecha is, it says there, to pray for an arousal from above, to be able to even have an arousal from below. The second bracha Yar is that you should actually do that avodah and get the arousal from above. And then Yisa is, when you have the first two, then you should have a revelation, b'chlal, from higher, that's a whole different level. And look also what it says, and look also it says in the Maimer Shal Paroi, that the true joy and connection and vakus in Hashem, one Hashem, is with a total nullification and bittul and humility through the accepting the yoke of heaven, through the involvement of Torah mitzvahs. Mean to say is, you're only doing it because you accepted it. You're not doing it because you really feel it. You're not really doing it because it's you with deep insight and feelings and emotions. No, you're doing it because God aroused you. You're doing it with nullification in a total way. You're totally subservient to God. Yet you're doing it with total joy. You're acting even in that way with total joy and excitement that you're able to fulfill the will of Hashem, etc., and that you're able to be His servant. You're able to bring His light to the world. All the reasons for the Simcha. That accomplishes that you could have this higher level, that even then it could be eternalized and real and long-lasting. So according to this, we'll also understand what it says, that on the crowned him on the day, his mother crowned the day of his chasana, day of his wedding, that's Matan Torah. Matan Torah is the day of Shavuos, right? It explains the idea of Pesach, Tzvir, Sa'imer, and Shavuos. That's very close to these three levels that we just mentioned about the Sustala Ela. Because Pesach is a level of jumping, it's revelation of arousal from above on its own. But this revelation doesn't happen in an inner way, as like Shavuos, that there it says by Matan Torah that Hashem spoke to you face to face. Rather, by Yetzias Mitzrayim, it says that Lechtech Acharai b'Midbar. We went after Hashem. It wasn't face to face. Then after the first day of Pesach, then we start counting the Disfir Sa'imer, which that's the drawing down an arousal from above through the arousal from below, which actually that is through the refinement of the Nefesh Bahamas, which that is the idea of this carbon of the Omer Sa'irim, of the barley, which is the food of an animal. And that's what this 49 days is. But then afterwards you have the 50th day, which that is the revelation of the 50th gate, level of Sharanun, which is higher than any arousal from below. And that's why it says on the third day, when it was morning, meaning the third day being Matan Torah, and Chachamim said that this is similar to the idea of the third day we will stand before him, which is referring to the days of Mashiach that we just mentioned before about Ma'ariv with regard to Yaakov Avinu, and therefore there's no counting of the 50th day, and it's a revelation that happens in an inner way, as we said, panim b'panim, face to face, yet it's from a place that we can't even count and we can't even reach. On the other hand, Pesach, which then there wasn't this revelation in an inner way yet, as it wasn't Shavuos. And that's what it says in Zohar, Parshas Emor, about the idea of Shavuos, that it's one day, it's Yom Echad, a special one day. And not only, and in this one day that he mentioned, it says kishura de le'ela. It's a combination. It's tied above reisha v'galgalto moicha, the head, the skull, and the intellect. So look there, Mikdash Melech, and also in the Ramaz, that reisha, the head, goes on the main level of Keser, which is the supernal surrounding light, which the galgalto, which the skull is its end and its external level, and then you have the level of moicha, the intellect, which is wisdom. And that is, and on Shavuos, all these three levels get together, they combine together, and they all shine down here below. So the way we explained it till now, we were speaking from a level from below to above, I believe, and that would be here, that the lowest level is the level of moichin, the intellect of Keser, and then we have above it the galgalto, which is the skull above it of Keser, and then we have even higher than that the level of Reisha, the head, which is the spiritual light, which is even higher in the inner level of this skull that is in Keser. He says in other places explain these three levels of Torah mitzvahs a little bit differently. And that is this level, the inner level of the Keser, which the skull is its external level. So that inner level is called Moichastima. And it says in Chaim Sharch of Beis or Perkei, I don't know. Anyway, so that really says these are the two levels. So there's the level of Pnimius HaKeser, or Moichastima, and then there's Galgalto, which is the external level of Moichastima. And then the third level, which is from above to below, this time we're going downwards, is the level of the wisdom of Atzilus. As we know, wisdom of Atzilus, that's where Torah comes from. So Torah comes from the level of wisdom, the Atzilus. Then the mitzvahs come from a level higher, which is the skull that is above the Chachma of Atzilus, which is coming also below, and it encloses itself also to the Chachma of Atzilus, explained there in Eitz Chaim. So really it's a level from above, it's a level from Arich, but it comes down into the level of the skull over the Chachma that there is in Atzilus. And therefore there's a greatness in Torah that's an inner level, it's Chachma, it's Maicha, it's intellect. And then that mitzvah is from an external level, which is only the skull. It's like the bone of the skull which surrounds the intellect. But there's also an advantage in the mitzvahs that's in the level of the skull, which is an external level of a higher level, which is of the external level of Chachma Stima of Atik, which is the inner level of the Keser. And the same way, we could say also in this level of Reisha, Galgalta, and Moicha, that Reisha is the head is the inner level of Keser, which is Moicha Stima. Then Galgalta is the skull, is the end of that in its external level, which is a lower level of Keser. And then Moichi, the brain, the intellect, is the level of Chabad of Atzilus. And look about the success in other places on the and then also looking at Shitlei Imoy and the Zohar, Parshas Nech, Parshas Shalach, Parshas Yisro, Parshas Shpatim, Vayikra, Parshas Achrei, and in the Mishnah, Seif Tainus, it sounds like, and he goes to another thing, that the day of his wedding, this day of Matan Torah, refers to Yom Kippur, not only to Shavuos, which there was given the second set of Luchais, as Rashi explains, that for sure Yom Kippurim is that this level is also applicable, this revelation of the crown, because this is the third level that comes, as we said, from below to above, which is the way we said it previously in the Maimer. As we said on the third day, Yikimenu, which this is also the crown that his mother crowned him, because all the ascensions that we have on Yom Kippur is coming through the level of Bina, which is the aim, the mother, which is all the joy comes from, and therefore that joy brings us that we could reach the level of, as we said before, the level of the glory that's beyond the crown, beyond the skull, as it is in Kesel. And the idea here is, it says you should raise up your hands to holy and bless Hashem, just like a mother blesses her children, in other words, and prepares her child, so to speak. The same way, it says she didn't leave her until he called her mother, as we mentioned before, that the Jewish people, they're the ones who accomplished this level, that the level of mother crowns. So it's known that the level of Abba ve'ema, which is Chachma and Bina, they enclose the arms, so to speak, of Arachampin. As explained in other places, with regard to the uplifting of the two breads that happens on top of the two goats, on top of two sheep, that says in Parshas Emor. And if so, when we draw down a bracha, and we draw down to Zah from Abba ve'ema, from Chacham and Bina, so within that bracha and Amshach, there's also from the arms of Arachampin that are enclosed within them. Okay, so we have already, and this is mamish, the bracha that is through the hands, as it says in Parshas Vayishlach, that Yisrael, it says that Yisrael, that Yaakov, he sent his hands and he put his right hand on the head of Ephraim, he used his hands for the bracha. And that's what says Sefer HaMekamalach, Sharidal, Perkim, Shatazvav, Perkim Ches. And this idea of lifting up your hands to the holy. Kodesh is a level of Abba, which is Chachma, which within it is the right hand of Arachampin. Ubarchu es Hashem, and you should bless, and you should, in other words, Zah, which is the idea of crowning the day that he was crowned on Matan Torah, crowning HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And look also on this Amshacha from Chesed of Arachampin that happens in Zah, is through Abba Ve'ema, which is through Chachma and Bina, in the Ma'amar Shavai Yechtem Merivav. And to be able to accomplish this Amshacha is through lifting up your hands, which is the idea of saying Shema Yisrael, which we said before, that these two are connected specifically with the hand. Each one is a higher, one's the right hand, one's the left hand. And looking at Chaim Shalom and exiled upon the verse that the 4 hands will be for you, and this is in the parsha with regard to Yosef, and the 5th one will be for Pare. In other words, that the 2 hands of Arachampin, both of them become counted as one. And they're called one hand. In other words, aside from the fact that there's no left hand in Atik, because in the level of Atik everything is right. So on this level, it says the 5th level is Pare, which is the level that gets revealed, so to speak, of the supernal mother, which is called Pare. From there it gets revealed and it gets opened. All the different lights, as it says in the Zohar Parsha Vayigash, and looking also in Beshalach, so we see that the hand of Arachampin gets revealed specifically in the level of Bina. And this is what it says in Eshus Chacham, Bashara Anava, that the level of mother is called the Oitzer Matnas Klinam, is a treasury of the free gift that's given from the highest of levels above. As we said, no Isustal Asata could reach this level, and this gets revealed on Yom Kippur, and therefore through the level of Suyudechem Kodesh, which is the level of totally going out and expiring to Hashem in Shema. Through that we draw down from the level of Arachampin into Abba Ve'ema, into Chacham and Bina, and from there it gets drawn into Zah, which is the level of Kadosh Baruch Hu. And this is what it says, he doesn't leave her until he started calling her mother. In other words, her love, until he started calling her mother. And this happens on Yom Kippur. And look what it says also in the Maimer, Rani V'Simchi. And with that we finish. That is the Maimer, the beer on Se'ena Ure'ena.